Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Two Rivers Tuesday. I am Maggie, and today I have a special guest with me. If you're watching on video, you can already see her and her bobblehead that she chose today. But if you're listening, I would love to introduce you to Erica Reed. I'll tell you guys a little bit about her, and then I'll let her tell you more about herself. I met Erica in October when she came to our church for the first time. And kind of the connection was, I've talked about Anchored Hope, what used to be Anchored Hope before, which is kind of a counseling network that we're partnered with and recommend people to. It's now called Anchored Virtual. But anyways, her boss told her about our church. And so when she moved here from Oklahoma, she came one Sunday morning and I liked her immediately. I was just like, oh, great, we're going to be friends. And so she has since joined our church and joined our life group, and it's just been really a gift getting to know her. So whenever I knew John was going to be on study leave, I was like, I want to have Erica on. So here's Erica. I'll let her tell you guys a little bit about herself and her two jobs.
Yeah, I moved here in October to be closer to my family. So right now I'm living at my parents' house with my parents, my brother, his wife, and two boys, and my grandma. So, full house.
So fun.
But my absolute joy in life right now is getting to live with my nephews and
yes, they're so
see
cute
them every day. But like Maggie said, I work for what was Anchored Hope and is now Anchored Virtual. It's a virtual biblical counseling group. And if you're not familiar with biblical counseling or with us, our kind of tagline is biblically grounded and clinically informed. So taking everything that we see in this world and viewing it through a biblical lens and applying that to counseling. So if you're looking for that in any way, I highly recommend it. I've been with them for 3 years now and have chosen to shape my other jobs around it because I love it so much.
Yes.
So
yeah, and I really like it too. One of the reasons I wanted our church to kind of partner with them is because of that balanced approach that you guys take. So if any listeners are familiar with like the counseling world, there can be a lot of extremes in that world. And that was some of my like questions to her boss is like, are y'all really balanced? Like, how would y'all answer this question? How would you approach this? And just like all of his answers, I was just like blown away by like the wisdom and the balance. And so, yeah, that's what I love about it. And I love how y'all partner with churches. So that's their big thing too, is like that you could kind of partner with a person's local church, because that's obviously a huge part of somebody's healing and growth as well. So yeah, tell us about your other job.
My other job right now is I work for the Momentum Network, which is a nonprofit downtown, and we help girls who face an unexpected pregnancy in college and single moms to persist through college.
That's so cool.
I'm a success coach there, so working with the moms and doing a lot of the background kind of policy work as well.
That's awesome. And is that for like all of the schools or all of the colleges around here?
Yeah, we work mostly with the not-for-profit schools. So UTC and Chat States are our main ones.
Okay, that makes sense. That's cool. If somebody like needs that resource or knows someone that needs that resource, how can they go about finding out more?
Google the Momentum Network.
Okay.
There's an interest form on there that takes like 2 minutes to fill out. And then we'll get a call and see how we can best help that person.
That's awesome. What do you most enjoy about counseling? I didn't prepare you for that question, but I'm throwing it at you.
Initially, when I was going to seminary, I actually was going for next generation ministry, and then I found myself gravitating more towards the counseling classes, and so I was like, I'm just going to switch my major. And I always thought I would use it just kind of in a ministry context, but once I got into my practicums and actually started doing the one-on-one or with couples, I realized how much I enjoyed getting to sit down and really dive into things with people and see those kind of light bulb moments and like the slow progressive change, because it is like a process. But to see people come to that and to see people like even graduate from counseling and just where they started to where they can end up.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure that is such a gift to just get a front row seat to what the Lord is doing and how he's healing them. That's awesome. Tell us a few things you enjoy doing outside of work.
Outside of work, well, playing with my nephews, probably number one right now. I'm excited to be in this area so that I can do more things outside once it gets warmer.
Yes.
I like baking and cooking. So enjoy getting to do those things and just getting to do them with friends.
Yeah,
so it's been fun to build friendships here and start that.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, let's transition to the sermon. So on Sunday, John kind of continued in what he talked about last Sunday, which was just this kind of idea of us seeing ourselves truly. And this Sunday, he talked especially about us seeing ourselves truly in light of God's holiness. And he talked about this kind of story in Isaiah 6 and the year King Uzziah died. And then Isaiah has this vision of God on the throne, and he sees himself truly in light of God's holiness. And then he also talked about these verses out of, I think it was Isaiah 57, and I'll read them now because I think it just paints such a beautiful picture of God's character. It says, I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite. And so we just love looking at who God is in these verses and thinking about how he dwells in the high and holy places, and he's so set apart. He's so different from us, yet he loves to revive us who are lowly in spirit. So when you think about like God's character and when he allows us to see ourselves truly, what does that make you think about God, or how does that kind of shape your view of God and how he is with us?
Yeah, I think this reminds me of at the end of Job. That's like what always comes to mind with this, of that the Lord is kind of like presenting back of like, who are you to like question me? And like goes on the long 3 chapters of like, here's who I am. And that being that reminder of just like how great he is, because I think sometimes we in church throw around those terms so much of like, he's our creator, and it's like when we sit and really think about that, it takes a whole much more impact than just throwing out the one word terminology to describe those attributes of him.
Yes.
And then to take a seat back from that and be like, okay, in relation to him, I am not like, who am I to approach you? But at the same time, we see clearly in scripture that's like he's inviting us into that kind of, as John's been talking about, that idea of like the king, the only one who has access to him in his bedchambers is his children. And that it's like he is this high and mighty position and calls us to acknowledge that and like have respect for that, but at the same time wants to draw us close. Yes,
yeah, that is a beautiful picture of his heart for us, is that even though we really don't deserve and we're really unworthy to be in his presence or to be able to talk to him, like through Christ, we actually now have like that victory and that authority and that same like access to come into his chambers and to be in his presence despite our sin. And that's what's so crazy about it. But I think a lot of times we don't view ourselves, or we don't have like a clear, humble view of ourselves, because we don't give ourselves the space and the time to really meditate on how set apart and how holy and how glorious and how incredible God is. Because I think we just forget. We're prone to wander. And so it's such a grace when he gives us a glimpse into his holiness. And it's such a grace when he gives us, therefore, a glimpse into our sin. So how do you feel personally when God gives you a glimpse into who he is, and therefore you kind of have that moment of like conviction and realizing like, oh, I'm sinful? Does that feel like, is God being mean to you, or how do you feel when that happens?
Yeah, I think sorry. We had talked about kind of those difference between like condemnation and conviction. Yeah. And I'll be honest, in my own personal life, it probably depends what sin is being revealed, whether the initial reaction is one of those things. Yes. And, condemnation being when something pushes us away from the Lord brings that guilt and shame and makes us kind of want to go and run and hide.
Yes.
Versus conviction being that position of, oh, I want to draw near to you because by you revealing this thing, I now can become more like you. That invitation of, oh, this is what's keeping me from being closer to you.
Yes.
I think I shared in our group a few weeks ago that in a counseling session, I was talking through something that combined, what is it? John 15?
Abiding
in the like pruning, and then the fruit of the Spirit, kind of taking both of those metaphors of like fruitfulness, and just this realization of like, if we're not willing to be pruned, to cut these things out, what we're doing is honestly saying like, I am willingly choosing to forego the fruit of the Spirit. And if we read that list, it's like, those aren't really things that I want to forego in my life.
Yeah.
And being like at a point where we're willing to let us be pruned, to let the things be taken away.
Yeah.
And invite those things back into our life. Kind of, we've been using that language of like the kink in the hose, being able to work that out. And, you know, in the times where it does lead more to condemnation and kind of that feeling of shame and guilt, being able to just like sit with those, and I think sit with like the gentleness of who he is.
Yeah.
And having to speak that over ourselves, having other people speak that over us, so we can get back to the point where we're more at a point of conviction and drawing near to him. Yeah.
I love that picture of like abiding and being willing to be pruned, and what we get as a result of being willing to be pruned. Because I think sometimes we can have this misconception of God that like he somehow like in like a malicious way almost like enjoys pointing out our sin, and he's like, ha, gotcha, like look, like you're still struggling. And that's just like so not his character and so not his heart. Like when he is gentle and gracious and kind to like reveal himself and therefore show us like how we're not in alignment with who he is, like that is so gracious of him to do that. And we have an opportunity there to be like, okay, do I want more of him? Do I want to be in alignment with him? Do I want more fruit in my life? Or am I content to just settle for this thing that I've grown comfortable with, this thing that I'm used to, or this like even this lie that has just gotten like so baked into my brain and like how I process everything. Like that type of thing is like hard to find freedom and healing from, but that is like what is on the table and like what he's offering us, and like the healing and the freedom that like can truly be found. But so often I feel like we're just like, nah, I don't want to do the work, or I don't want to submit, or I'm comfortable, I'll settle for that. And in doing so, we're, like you said, like just being like, no, I'll forego all the fruit that he has for me. And I just think in my own life, like I miss out on so much fruit that he could be just like multiplying in my life in such abundance, because sometimes I just settle for like, no, I'll keep the sin. I'm good. Talk a little bit about, you also shared in our group about this kind of how you viewed this line from the Lord's Prayer about forgive us our debts in light of our daily bread. I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah. In just as we started the sermon series, I had read through the passage, and I feel like a new gleaning was that in verse 11, give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our debts. Like those things are combined. And, you know, one of those fun things we learn in seminary is to pay attention to words.
Yes.
And to see like those are conjoined for what reason. And it just struck me, it's like both the bread and the forgiveness are both a daily need.
Yeah.
And to be able to view them that way and treat them that way, I think leads us into what we'll get into more of, like that desperation kind of attitude that John talked about with the AA kind of approach. But if we're seeking him out for our daily needs, are we viewing forgiveness of our debts as one of those things?
Yeah. And I think we, like John said on Sunday, we can fall into the trap of thinking like we're pretty good. And so like we don't really need forgiveness daily. Like I need it when I like mess up big, but daily, like that feels like a little much. But I think what you're getting at, and that level of desperation that we want to like cultivate in our hearts, is that posture of just like, every hour I want to like be realigning myself with God's character and like be willing to like be corrected, be willing to like ask for forgiveness again, be willing to like change course, be willing to realign with his heart. And I think an acknowledgement that like that is what we need is part of what kind of creates that desperation that John was getting at. And it's only when we like have that level of desperation that we get to like more fully experience his grace and his mercy and his like come to me and his kindness and all of that. So let's talk a little more about maybe engage the heart, and how from your experience in counseling, what are some kind of things when someone has that kind of in God's kindness, he is showing them something and they are courageously kind of putting that into the light and they're telling their group about it. What are maybe some tools, or how you think through how to respond, or like why that time matters?
Yeah. And thinking about this question beforehand, James 5 kept coming to mind, which is the confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And if we're coming from kind of that counseling mindset, like hope and healing is usually what people are looking for. And that is something that we can so much find in engage the heart time as well. By doing just that, we're doing that confession of sin to one another. We're praying for one another. And I went to a trauma training last Friday, and they were talking about most trauma happens in relationship. So the healing from it has to happen in relationship too.
Oh, that's really good.
And as much as like I, as a counselor, am working with a person and may have a counseling relationship with them, I'm seeing them 1 hour a week, maybe 1 hour every other week. The people that they're in relationship with on more this level, that's where real healing can also happen. You know, you were talking in core class yesterday about even just someone lighting up when someone walks in the door and is excited to see you. Like, that's healing.
Yes.
And, as a counselor, I totally think that there's like reasons and things that people should come to counseling for.
Right.
But especially in biblical counseling, a lot of what I'm paying attention to is, do you have a life group kind of relationship in your life?
Yeah.
And if not, one of my goals by the end of counseling is that you will.
Wow.
Because that we all need that to experience this kind of healing and ongoing work in our hearts, because it's ongoing. Life is ongoing with hardships. We need ongoing hope and healing. It keeps
coming up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So being able to help people to find that in their lives, because I would say most of the people that I find in counseling, they don't currently have those relationships. So helping them to develop those, and maybe we're working on why those haven't developed, and then helping them to work on having those in their lives. But yeah, I think that mindset of the healing from sin and against you or your own sin happens in those relationships.
Yes.
I think also the asking good questions. A lot of counseling is asking good questions. So working on that in this time of in engage the heart time, before you respond with something else, like, is there a question I can ask this person that may take this even one step deeper? That they haven't thought about before, or maybe they have and haven't quite been willing to comfortable to say initially. But a question might prompt them to share it.
Yes.
The other thing I think of here, we've kind of touched on already, but in studying gentleness, I just went through and did a word study of it one time and found that majority of the times that it's used is in a context of correction, whether it's in the Lord correcting us or how we are supposed to correct one another. So I think in this time is a great way to apply that and approach that of if we're confessing sin to one another, there is gentle correction to be found there.
Yeah.
And that is the way that it is supposed to be displayed,
Yes.
because that's the way that the Lord displays it to us.
Yes, yeah. And even that's something we talk about a lot, of just like the kind of culture we want to have as a church family is one that we fight for relational health and we help one another fight for holiness. Like, and that's what that looks like, I think, is like, I love you too much to be willing to watch you like go down this wrong path. But and so I love you enough to like have to do the hard work of gently like correcting. And I think we're like so allergic to that word in our culture. Like I even feel bad like even like saying like correct you, because that feels like so intense, and because we're just so wired in our culture to think that like anything like that would be bad or wrong or mean or shame you. And it's like, not at all. Like the only reason I would do that is because of my love for you and because I want more for you. And so that's what I like desire to see more and more in our church family, is just like a willingness to receive correction that's done lovingly and gently, and a willingness to give it, because that means we all are at the foot of the cross, which John talked about, like, and at the foot of the cross it's level there, and so we all need more of him. We all need to be corrected, we all need to be encouraged, we all have blind spots, like we all need to be pointed to him in a million ways, and like nobody is exempt, nobody has like matured past needing that. And so I think that's a great point, just the beauty of gentle correction and us all like growing in holiness through that. I was also just thinking about like the word healing, and just how for me that's a really helpful word to think about in this context, and how that is what Jesus loves to do. And so when you are made aware of your sin and you're like aware that he sees it too, you know, that it can be that moment of like I am so like ashamed, and that is like where you're at risk for condemnation and lies, and you can feel tempted to run. But like if we just realize and remember, like he's so much more eager to forgive than we are to confess, and he moves toward us in our mess. Like that's just who he is and what he loves to do. And so just remembering like that's who he is, that's what he's like. Before we end, let's just get practical real quick of what does it look like to make space to reflect on our sin. Like if we are like, okay, I want to grow in my desperation for knowing I need Jesus, I want to grow in my understanding of like how he wants to heal me and align my heart back to his. What are some practical ways maybe you spend time reflecting on that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think John mentioned this on Sunday, either this week or last week, but that kind of has to start by like spending time with him.
Yeah.
We can't be aware of what he has set out as good if we're not spending time in his word or spending time in prayer. And I think even that, taking the time to quiet all the noise and have kind of that silence and solitude practice to leave room for him to speak, for him to give these gentle nudges and things like that. So first and foremost, it's those things. Some of the other questions I would probably ask is like, where is your time, money, emotions, and thoughts focused? You know, what are you giving the most of yourself, of your resources to, and is that becoming a substitute?
Yeah, I think a lot of times I spend time in the evening as I'm trying to fall asleep. I spend time reflecting, and one of the questions that usually like helps me kind of grow in awareness is I ask myself like, where today did I see like a major spike in emotion in myself? And a lot of times that is showing me like, okay, that was a unnecessary, like that didn't quite match. So what was going on in my heart? What was underneath that? What was I like what was I after in that? And why did I feel like that was being taken from me? And when I felt like that was being taken from me, what was my response? So in that type of reflection, am able to see like a lot of layers of my brokenness, and am able to be like, okay, Lord, like I want to invite you into that. Like, help heal the way that's what my brain and my flesh did. They're like, please come and like heal that. And thank you that there's hope for change. And I think that's something that we talked about in our group 2 weeks ago, I think. It's just like, it just blows my mind to realize and like have the faith to really believe there could be a real day where that's not how I respond. And I just think that that's what I want to leave people with today, is just like that thing that you always do, that like lie that you always believe, that reaction that you always have that feels like you just feel so discouraged by how besetting it is. Like, when we look at Jesus and we look at his holiness and we look at his gentleness, like, he really does want to heal that. He like truly wants to bring freedom to that. And it's not foolish or irresponsible or lavish for us to think he really could and really would and really can.
Yeah.
And so I just want to encourage people to like ask him to give you the faith to believe that could happen, and really like trust him, and really like imagine that level of freedom and healing, and ask him like, what can we do? How can I partner with you to like get to that point, that level of freedom, that level of healing? And I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, but it's possible, and that's a beautiful thing to imagine.
Yeah, it is. I think something that's come up recently a lot, both like in our conversations and other places, is just this reminder that's like, we can change.
Yes.
Even when it feels totally like, oh, nope, that's just the way that it is. It's like, no, that is why there is hope.
Yes.
And is because of how he wants to transform us.
Yes.
I think one of the best interpretations that I have heard of Romans 8:28 is, which is the God works thing, all things together for the good of his people. It saying, replacing good with godliness. Like, he works all things together because ultimately our good is being
more godly.
Yes. So thinking that it's like, he is working all things together, even when it hurts. That's something that's working together to make you more like him.
Yes. Yeah. And that's for our good and for his glory. And so that's why we can trust him to like do some of this painful work, and we can trust him to like see the nastiness in us, because he already sees it, and we can trust him with all of it. So yeah, just in closing, I just encourage everybody to imagine that level of freedom and healing, and to invite Jesus into those places where you feel like almost cynical, like where you feel like that'll never change. Like, that's probably the spot he's most ready and most eager to heal and change in you, and he can, and that's what he delights to do. So run to him with that. All right, well, thank you, Erica, for being on the podcast, and thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back next week.